Hello everyone. Hello, welcome in, lax. Lean backs. Lean back, so your eyes. This in grace, dressed off to sleep in peace. First of all, subscribe to my channel and leave a comment. Chompter I. Wender I. When darkness falls you. Tease you of ohms of Rome. Rome, master of the world. The heart of an empire built upon 7 hills, crowned with marble columns, adorned with triumphal arches and golden temples. By day, this city was the emblem of order, law, and civilization. Senators walked the stone-paved roads of the Forum, clutching their togas. Merchants raised their voices, children ran through the streets, priests offered prayers to the gods. Everything appeared to be in its rightful place. Everything gleamed, a performative perfection, but when the sun retreated behind the horizon, Rome transformed. The streets took on a different life. The faces hidden by the light of day began to emerge. Darkness was the city's second identity. And that identity was far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more human than the ordered world of daylight. Romans regarded the night itself as a threat. The city's lighting system was woefully inadequate. Narrow streets, dead-end alleys, and the towering apartment buildings known as insulae turned nightfall into an inescapable labyrinth. If a wealthy citizen was forced to venture out after dark, he would bring along slaves carrying torches. The poor were left to defend for themselves in the blackness. The nightlife of ancient Rome is a fascinating chapter of history, one long overlooked by historians, yet too lowly to light through archaeological discoveries, written sources, and a surprisingly rich body of literary evidence. Tonight, we descend into the depths of that history. We invite you into a world where pleasure, danger, and the struggle for survival are inextricably intertwined. What truly happened when the doors were shut? Where did senators drink? Where did gladiators sleep? How did a poor Roman citizen survive the night? And most importantly, in what dark corners did those forbidden rituals, those sick gatherings, those dirty secrets come to life? If you are ready, let us begin at the very moment the sun disappears. Welcome to the night of Nye's greatest city. A night that has never been fully told. Chapter 2, The Laws of Night. Prohibition, and enmity were, with the coming in Rome. Certain rules came into force. Among the most striking was a restriction on wheeled traffic. During daylight hours, wheeled vehicles were banned from Rome's narrow, crowded streets. As a result, merchants, tradespeople, and those needing to transport goods were compelled to work through the night. The rumble of cargo wagons, the ring of horseshoes on stone, the shriek of wheels. All of these were the indispensable sounds of a Roman night. The Roman poet Juvenal, writing his satires in the 2nd century, lamented this very situation. The poor who lived in the upper floors of great insula blocks could not sleep because of this relentless nocturnal noise. According to Juvenal, sleep in Rome was the exclusive privilege of the wealthy, for they would retreat to the quiet corners of the city, draw curtains across their windows, and guard their rest from the din. But the vast majority of the populace had no choice to learn to live alongside this urban symphony that played all through the night. The vigilas, established during the reign of Augustus to maintain nocturnal order, served simultaneously as firefighters and night watchmen. This force of approximately 7,000 men divided the city into 7 cohorts and patrolled accordingly. The power of the vigils was limited. They'd reach at every corner of the city, nor make their presence felt in every dark alley. Rome's nights, therefore, were a world in which laws existed only in theory. Crime and violence were the unavoidable realities of Roman nights. Robberies, brawls, and murders were frequent occurrences. Walking alone after dark, especially in lower-class neighborhoods such as the Sabura, demanded genuine courage. Some wealthy Romans, well aware of these dangers, traveled with escorts. When venturing out to evening gatherings, the poor either stayed home or braved the streets and took their chances. Another notable legal regulation can concern the nighttime illumination of properties. During certain periods of Roman history, particularly in the late Republic and early Imperial era, buildings were required lamps or torches at their entrances. How consistently this obligation was enforced in practice, however, remains a matter of debate. Archaeological excavations at Pompeii have revealed traces of lamps positioned within stone niches at street corners, suggesting that at least some neighborhoods enjoyed limited nocturnal illumination. Noise ordinances were another significant factor shaping nightlife. Craftsmen hammering after dark, smiths working their forges. Such activities frequently drew complaints. Pliny the Younger mentions in his letters the noise generated by craftsmen working through the night. These conflicts reveal the inevitable friction of urban life. Must work, but their work disturbs their neighbors, and if they do not work, they go hungry. The world of taverns and INS, Rome's nightclubs, Halls of Rome beat in the taverns between its alleys, known in Latin as capone or tabernae. These establishments were the ancient equivalent of a bar-restaurant hybrid. Yet to view them through a modern lens would be misleading, for Romanovers had assumed hunger far more complex social function. Excavations at Pompeii provided some of the most valuable clues history has to offer on this subject. Buried beneath the lava of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79, Pompeii was, in a sense, a Roman city frozen in time Archaeologists have identified approximately 200 company in the city, meaning nearly one in every three structures served as some sort of food or drink establishment. This density makes abundantly clear to commercial and social life of Rome. A typical Roman tavern operated as follows. One or more semi-open sections faced the street. Within these sections stood counters made up of large jars, ceramic vessels known as dolia, which stored and sold wine, oil, grain, and other goods. Customers would enter, settle at the counter, or stand before it, and place their orders. Taverns featured back rooms or upper floors used for more private meetings or overnight stays. Tavern owners and workers were typically drawn from the ranks of freedmen or lower-class citizens. These were not considered prestigious professions within Rome's social hierarchy. Rich-able families or members of the senatorial class could not openly operate such establishments, or at least supposed to. When night fell, those boundaries grew blurred. Wall inscriptions and graffiti discovered at Pompeii paint and inscribed extrude of the social atmosphere inside these taverns. Anyone who has not stopped here for a drink has a long road ahead, reads one tavern wall. On another, a customer's complaint has been scratched into the plaster. Why did you take so long to bring our wine, you lazy wretch? These graffiti collapse the centuries between us and that noisy, smoky, wine-scented world, pulling us directly into the scene. Wine was, one might say, Rome's national drink. This wine was very different from what we imagine today. Roman wine was generally quite dense and pungent. It was therefore standard practice to dilute it with water before drinking. Consuming wine undiluted, in its pure state, was considered barbaric, a sign of social deviance. The ratio of wine to water was an indicator of one's sophistication. 3 parts water to 2 parts wine was a typical measure. Alongside taverns, establishments known as thermopolia, shops selling hot food, were equally indispensable to the Roman night. The vast majority of Roman apartment buildings lacked kitchens, and Olens offered only the most rudimentary cooking facilities due to fire safety concerns. As a result, a significant portion of the population could not cook at home and depended on street vendors or thermopolia. The situation closely resembles the fast food culture of a modern city, but driven by necessity rather than convenience. The famous thermopolium of Vetusius Plasplestis in Pompeii offers an excellent example of how these establishments functioned. Jars in its counter containing remnants of various foods, hell olives, fish, meat, and other provisions. Colorful frescoes on the walls both decorated the space, provided visual cues of a babble of cues of the items on offer. Cunners would arrive in the late afternoon or evening, collect their hot meals, and either eat on the spot or carry the food home. Taverns also functioned as information hubs. News, gossip, and political rumor radiated outward from these. For the ordinary Roman citizen, there was no newspaper. But the conversations at the tavern counter formed comprehensive information network. Which general had won a victory? How the emperor's health was faring? But accidents were a work by veils. All of this begurs the tavern bench. Chapter: Illicit pleasers. Gambling and secret games. Gambling in Rome was illegal. At least in theory. In practice, gambling had penetrated every layer of Roman society and become an inseparable part of daily life. Various laws, the Lex Titia, the Lex Tia, the Lex Publicia, and the Lex Cornelia among them, prohibited gambling except under specific circumstances and provided for criminal penalties. In practice, however, these laws were largely ignored. Among the Romans' games, dice stood out above all. Known as tesserae, these four-sided, six-sided dice were fashioned from bone, or glass. They were commonly used in taverns and at private gatherings. Another popular game was tabulae, a board game resembling backgammon. Frescoes on the walls of Pompeii, depicting dice players, reveal an economic dimension of these establishments. Money was the most common medium for wagering, though bets were sometimes plum clothing, jewelry, or even slaves. Losses, catastrophic. Historical sources record individuals who, unable to pay gambling debts, were reduced to slavery or took their own lives. References to gambling addiction in the letters of Cicero and the poetry of Horace, illustrating just how widespread and destructive the phenomenon was. Perhaps most striking is the fact that emperors themselves were not immune to gambling. Augustus was known for his fondness for games of chance, though in his case, Claudius was reputed to be a gambling addict. Legend has it he even had portable gaming boards fitted to his carriage so he could roll dice while traveling. Caligula, when he lost, would fly into a rage and punish his guests or slaves. The spectacle of lawmakers breaking their own laws was one of Rome's most characteristic contradictions. The one period when gambling was legal was the festival of Saturnalia, celebrated in December over approximately a week. This festival sets all non-normal social rules. Slaves sat at the same table as their masters. Dice were thrown freely, and wine flowed without restriction. This temporary liberation was a controlled mechanism for releasing the pressure accumulated in a tightly ordered society. Once the festival ended, everything snapped back into place. Guessing games were also widespread. In a game called My Cat You, Two players simultaneously extended fingers and attempted to guess the total number of fingers shown. This is the very game still played today in Italy and other Mediterranean countries as Morha, one of ancient Rome's living legacies. Its particular appeal lay in requiring no props, such as money. It could be played anywhere, under any circumstances. Chapter Vir v. Prostitution and Rome's Nocturnal Economy. Prostitution in Rome was not illegal. On the contrary, it was a profession both recognized and taxed by the state. Yet this did not mean that those working within the trade lived any measure of dignity. A deep lest prized asked and built a foundation of found social equality and exploitation. Luminaire, that is bulls, were defining features of Roman urban centers. In Pompeii, archaeologists have identified between 12 and 35 luminaire, a figure there that, given the size of the city, is remarkably high. The best preserved example is the structure known as the Lupanar of Pompeii. This two-story building contains 5 small rooms, the ground floor, each with a fresco above its doorway, serving simultaneously as decoration and as a visual catalog of servitude. The rooms are extremely small. Some contain little more than a stone bed. Latin inscriptions on the walls have been interpreted as customer reviews or biographical notes left by the workers. The overwhelming majority of those employed in this sector were slaves. For a freeborn Roman woman to enter this trade was exceedingly rare and invariably the product of desperation. Women and men who were enslaved and forced received no share of their earnings. All income went to a lino or lana, a per her or madam, and to the property owner behind them. Roman law was deeply contradictory regarding the legal status of these individuals. On one hand, they were required to register their profession in and municipal officials known aediles maintained this registry. On the other hand, once entered in this registry, a person was deemed to have forfeited their social honor. In Roman law, this condition was called infamia. It meant the loss of civil rights. One could not testify in court, could not inherit property, and was subject to numerous other restrictions. The clientele of this sector spanned an extraordinarily broad spectrum: soldiers, craftsmen, merchants, and young men from the wealthy, all frequent stabulants. A senator or citizen visiting a lupanar would certainly not have been looked upon favorably. But that it happened cannot be denied either. In one of his famous speeches, Cicero acknowledges that young men may wish to explore such experiences, adding that there's no appropriate behavior for a grown man. Street prostitution was far more visible and far more dangerous. Some women worked at night beneath certain bridge arches or narrow alleyways. The Latin term for these individuals was connected to the word fornix, meaning an arch. It is from this root that the English word fornication derives. The very etymology of the word lies embedded in Rome's architecture. Some taverns also covertly assumed this function. Establishments officially serving food and drink, but offering services in their back rooms or upper floors, managed to evade both the authorities and public. All of this illustrates just how layered and complex the nocturnal economy of Rome truly was. Chapter Visor. Religion and urine ritual. Autumn. All suns constitute a special dimension of Roman religious life. The official state religion conducted all its ceremonies during daylight hours, in open spaces, and before the eyes of the public. But the night belonged to different gods, different rituals, and far more personal beliefs. The Bacchanalia, the rites of Bacchus, represent the most dramatic case of nocturnal prohibition in Roman history. In Rome 80-66 BC, the Roman Senate passed a historic decree banning these ceremonies. But what were these rituals, and why were they considered so dangerous? Bacchus, as was the Roman counterpart of the Greek Dionysus, god of wine, fertility, ecstasy, and divine frenzy. The rites held in his honor were originally open only to women and were celebrated 3 times a year. Over time, however, these ceremonies underwent a profound transformation. Men were admitted, the gatherings shifted to nighttime hours, and according to the account of the historian Livy, these meetings involved nocturnal rituals, the intoxication, sexual license, and even acts of violence. The reports reaching the Senate were sensational. Tens of thousands were said to be attending. Secret oaths were being sworn. Participants were said to be transgressing all normal moral boundaries. Some modern historians argue that these accounts were greatly exaggerated. The state constructed the Bacchanalia as a threat in order to justify tightening its control. Nevertheless, the Senate its ban in a decree known as the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, preserved on a carefully kept bronze tablet. This act is regarded as one of the first major interventions by the Roman state against religious freedom. The prohibition multiplied with each passing generation. The arriving from Egypt conducted its songs and rituals largely at night. The free cult of Cybele, with its ecstatic ceremonies performed to the sound of drums and pipes, inspired both fascination and alarm. The cult of Mithras, originating in the East, entirely secretive in structure. Its members gather were similarly shaped by nocturnal gatherings. Roman officials first viewed these meetings with suspicion and later with outright hostility. They meet at night. They perform secret rituals. They eat bread and drink wine. Accusations, though they partly reflected reality, arose largely from fear and misunderstanding. The agape meals and Eucharistic rites of early Christians had collided with Rome's entrenched prejudices concerning foreign nocturnal cults. Rome's culture of magic and sorcery was also deeply intertwined with the night. Deficciones, cursed tablets, were inscribed onto sheets of lead and buried at midnight near fountains or in cemeteries. These tablets, typically prepared with the aim of harming an enemy, winning the heart of a lover, or inflicting illness on a rival, discovered in Pompeii and in countless corners of the Roman world, they reveal how richly and darkly populace supplemented official religion with the practice of hidden mystery. Necromancy, the art of communicating with the dead, was also widespread in Rome. Despite official disapproval, practitioners known as magi claimed to summon the spirits, the dead, through midnight rituals. The senator, orator Pliny the Younger recounts a ghost story in one of his letters with an earnestness that speaks volumes about how deeply Rome believed in the world of spirits. Chapter V. Gladiators, 18 Night. Life beyond the arena. Gladiators were Rome's most contradictory figures. On one hand, and they occupied the very lowest rungs of the social hierarchy. Most were slaves or convicts, legally classified as infames, that is, dishonorable. On the other hand, the skill and courage they displayed in the arena elevated them to the status of popular icons. Graffiti found at Pompeii contains expressions such as Selenus, the heartbeat of the girls, or crescents, the Lord of the Night, revealing what an almost mythical center of attraction gladiators represented in social life. The place where gladiators lived was the ludus, the gladiatorial school or barracks. Discipline there was strict and movement was heavily restricted. And successful gladiators could earn certain privileges. Night passes were among these, being received as a guest by a sponsor or patron, entertaining visitors, and, in some cases, moving freely to certain parts of the city. All of this was possible for those who had earned enough of a reputation. According to legend, certain gladiators were the secret favorites of Rome's wealthy women. Such arrangements would naturally have been kept deeply hidden. But denying their existence entirely is equally difficult. Rumors that the wife of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Faustina, had developed a particular the tier in the written beer. Though the greater part of such accounts may well have been gossip circulated by enemies. Even so, The very existence of these rumors speaks to the way gladiators had embedded themselves in the nocturnal imagination of Rome. The taverns, located at near gladiatorial schools, were the points where the working life and nightlife of these fighters intersected. In these establishments, fees were negotiated, old rivals shared drinks, and encounters with spectators took place. It is known that many gladiators received a level of medical care comparable to that of a practitioner, and that they followed specialized dietary regimens. Analysis of bones, bone, an ancient gladiatorial cemetery discovered near Ephesus has revealed that these fighters consumed a high carbohydrate diet, possibly a deliberate strategy, building up a thick layer of protective subcutaneous fat. The story of a gladiator who survived the arena and then moved quietly through the city at night, representative of Rome's most intriguing subcultures. For those who were slaves, these moments of freedom were immeasurable value. The octorati, gladiators who had contracted themselves voluntarily, retained far greater control over their own will. It is documented that some gladiators, accumulating their earnings over time, eventually built up enough wealth to establish an independent life. Violence, however, was an unavoidable danger even for gladiators who ventured out at night. It was understood that rivals might seek revenge, that former patrons might apply pressure, and that thieves might target these celebrated figures. It was not uncommon for a gladiator to meet his end, not in the arena, but in the street. Chapter 3. The Night of the Poor. Surviving. In the insulae behind Rome's dazzling mosaics, monumental arches, and magnificent lay a very different world. The vast majority of the city's population lived in multi-story apartment buildings called insulae. These structures were built from wood and low-grade fired brick. They were extremely vulnerable to fire, air, and offered little in the way of structural reliability. Some rose to 5, 6, even 7 stories, impressive by virtually any standard. Juvenal describes these buildings with grim irony. He writes that those living on the upper floors were closest to the stars in the event of a roof collapse, while simultaneously occupying the most dangerous position. The lower floors were comparatively dirtier and more sheltered from noise, which is whence they were higher. As one climbed higher, rents dropped, but risks multiplied and living conditions deteriorated. Spending the night in these buildings presented serious difficulties. Fire, the foremost danger. Romans used olive oil lamps and braziers for both light and heat. These open flames could spread with terrifying speed through wooden structure. Ancient sources contain numerous references to large urban fires. The Great Fire of Rome in AD 64 is the most dramatic example of this disaster. But smaller fires were part of nightly life in virtually every neighborhood. Access to water was a serious problem as well. Oxen fountains with abundant water, but this water could not be piped to upper floors. Those living on the higher levels were forced to make the descent every day, carrying water containers up and down the stairs. The toilet situation was still more grim. Insulae had latrines on the ground floor, connected to the city's sewage system. Higher up, conditions grew considerably more unpleasant. Urine and excrement were sometimes simply tipped to the street at night. Walking through Rome's narrow streets after dark demanded vigilance not only against robbers, but against whatever might be emptied from above. The nighttime heat was another source of hardship. Rome's summers were hot, cramped rooms, upper floors absorbed the heat of the day and carried it into the night. Multiple families sometimes shared a single room. Noise arrived from both the street below and then the neighbors next door. From the crying of infants, from quarrels, from the rattling of carts, from the singing of drunken customers. Nights filled with this cascading wall of sound were entirely ordinary for many Romans. And yet people slept. Research into sleep habits in ancient Rome has produced some intriguing findings. Some historians and medical historians have argued that a pattern known as spaphyclic sleep was common during this era. According to this theory, people spin two stages. A short in the early evening, followed by a period in which might read, pray, or engage in intimacy, and then a second sleep until morning. This pattern may well have been widespread before the industrial evolution and was the norm of 8 continuous hours of uninterrupted sleep. Chapter VI. The night of the late banquets, bants, and Simsea, culture Rome's wealthy and powerful experience the night in an entirely different manner. Evening banquets lasting for hours, the convivia, lay at the very center of elite social life. These gatherings were not simply about eating. They were performances of power, prestige, alliance, and cultural superiority. A typical convivium was structured around 3 courses. The gestaccio, or starter, featured olives, eggs, vegetables, and appetizers accompanied by mulsum, a honeyed wine. The cena, or main course, brought meat, fish, and various garnishes. Finally, the secunda mansa, the dessert course, offered fruits, nuts, and confections. The drinking that followed the meal, the commissatio, was the most intimate and uninhibited part of the evening. Philosophical debates were conducted, poetry was recited, music was performed, and games were played. A symposiarch, or drinking master, determined the ratio of wine to water and set the rhythm of the night. This role carried both authority the chosen individual, held sway over the entire gathering, which guests received an invitation to a convivium was a matter of the greatest importance. The seating arrangement was a direct mirror of Rome's social hierarchy. Who sat on which couch? Who was positioned closest to the host? Who received which quality of food and service? All of this was calculated with meticulous symbolic intent. In one of his letters, Pliny the Younger criticized the practice serving different quality food and wine to different guests, describing it as a profoundly demeaning. Music was an inseparable part of these evenings. The lyre, the tibia, a double pipe instrument. Other instruments were played trained slave musicians or independent artists. Singers and dancers were also part of the entertainment. Profanement, mime performance, clowning, and acrobatics sometimes appeared at convivia as well. Literary readings were one of the hallmarks of cultural stage. Found in these gatherings the opportunity to present new works to an audience. Virgil, Horace, Ovid, Rome's great poets gave readings in the homes of their patrons. Pliny's writings record occasions when these readings and until dawn, with guests transfixed by the quality of a literary performance and the weight of appreciative applause. Yet even these elite evenings were not free from danger. Political intrigues, poisoning attempts, and secret alliances took shape in these very rooms. The wrong word spoken at a convivium could create a powerful enemy. From a cup of wine might be the last sip ever taken. Accounts in the ancient sources recounted by figures such as Titus Claudius Balbillus and echoed in numerous other texts emphasize just how pervasive poisoning was within the circles of the imperial court and the Roman elite. Chapter X, Rum's Nocturnal Pharmacy, Medicines, and currents in magical herbs. In the Nocturnal of Rome, healing herbs, poisons, and magical potions occupied a place of considerable importance. This knowledge manifests itself across both the medical hymenal dimensions of ancient life. Dioscorides de Materia Medica, written in the 1st century AD, was of a foundational text of pharmacology and medicine for centuries, and it remains astonishing in the accuracy of much of its content, demonstrating just how advanced herbal medicine become in the ancient world. Among sleep aids, the opium poppy held a place of particular prominence. Known in Latin as Papaver somniferum, this plant was used for its analgesic and insuporific properties in both medical and religious contexts. Roman physicians working in public creeks were well aware of its effects. Mixtures containing opium derivatives administered to reduce pain during surgical procedures, but abuse was equally widespread. Some sources indicate that individuals living in desperate circumstances turn to opium-based preparations as a means of sleep and escape. Poisons were the darkest instrument of Roman politics. A woman named Locusta, working in collaboration with the Empress Agrippina the Younger, mother of Emperor Nero, became historically notorious for the poisoning of political rivals. In A54, strong suspicions surround the death of Emperor Claudius from a dish of mushrooms. And Agrippina is widely held to have been the architect of this scheme. Locusta, through these dark skills, became a favored figure within the imperial court, protected by Nero, and almost a avant-garde in the art. The sophistication that Romans developed in the field of toxicology is equally remarkable. The ruler of the kingdom of Pontus, known as Mithridates, Sid's to make himself immune to poison by consuming small doses of various toxic substances each day, gradually building up a tolerance. This belief has passed into medical history under the name mysticism. Some Roman aristocrats were reputed to have taken similar precautions. The culture, love potions also occupied a significant place in Rome's nocturnal world. Many women and men sought out sorcerers or potion sellers in the hope of winning someone's heart. These practitioners would gather specific plants at specific times, prepare special mixtures, and present them, sometimes accompanied by magical incantation, or administer them secretly in food or drink. The Latin word beneficium, meaning both art of magic and the art of poisoning, derived from the same root for both meanings. The intertwining these two senses speaks volumes about the mentality of the age. Chapter Kutsun. The anatomy of crime. The dangers of Rome's dark streets. Rome's streets harbored a variety of dangers after nightfall. Robbers, killers, known as latrinkli or zakurli, lurked in the shadows, watching for their moment, choosing their prey and striking without warning. Some of these individuals were members of urga gangs. Others were simply people driven to crime by poverty. Ancient written sources contain numerous accounts of these danes. Apuleius' novel, The Golden Ass, vividly depicts the fear and peril of the streets of Rome after dark. Petronius Satiricon paints a similarly dark picture built around the strange and dangerous adventures that unfold in the nighttime city. These works are fictional, yet they are generally accepted by scholars to reflect the realities of the period. Perhaps the most intriguing criminal of all is the one encompassed by various categories, sometimes described in Roman sources by the term strix. Restrix referred both to a real bird, likely a species owl, and to a witch or creature said to roam the night and harm children. The dual meaning carried by this single word, offers a succinct encapsulation of Rome's beliefs and fears about the dark. Smuggling was also a significant component of the nocturnal economy. Stolen goods, prohibited items, and the slave trade were all conducted under cover of darkness, in major port cities in particular. Shia Oi, Oshia Chios Ai, and others, illicit commerce is known to have been brisk throughout the night. Bringing goods into the city without paying customs duties was a well-known method favored by traders who resented the tax burden. Counterfeit currency and fraud were also common crimes. Roman forgers worked by night to replicate state-produced coins. This crime brought extremely harsh penalties if discovered. But the lure of profit was evidently sufficient to make the risk worthwhile. Numerous archaeological excavations have uncovered common coins, pointing to just how widespread the criminal industry was. Slaves, attempting to escape, also used the night to their advantage. Roman law contained extremely detailed provisions regarding runaway slaves, and those who were caught faced severe punishment. Slaves regularly used the cover of darkness to try to slip free from the urban labyrinth. Some succeeded, many recaptured. But these attempts lay bare just how much the people on the lowest rungs of Roman society were willing to sacrifice in pursuit of freedom. Chapter 5. The Night of Love. Romance, the world of Ovid. Ovid was Rome's greatest poet of love. And his works reveal how extraordinarily complex, strategic, and political a domain love in sexuality occupied in ancient Rome. In Ars Amatoria, the art of love, Ovid, a remarkably detailed guide to flirtation and seduction. The book caused such scandal that it is cited as one of the reasons Emperor Augustus sent him into exile. Much of Roman love life, by necessity, conducted in secrecy. For married couples, public social life, school life, was governed by a specific set of rules. But extramarital relationships occupied an entirely different sphere. For a woman of the elite, having a lover required the careful maintenance of absolute discretion. Ovid's poems describe the codes of this concealment, erotic detail. Trustworthy servants carrying messages, meeting places, prearranged signals. Often these encounters took place during the moments when the night offered the least surveillance, while a husband or parent slept, while the lamp burned low, while doors were eased open without a sound. In the works of other elegiac poets, Tibullus and Proteus, such scenes recur again and again. Propertius' poems, in which he describes nocturnal rendezvous with his beloved Cynthia, make vividly clear how Roman Romanticism drew sustenance from precisely this clandestine quality. Night. It is constitute an important dimension of Roman love life. messages inscribed onto wax tablets. The tablets, known as tabulae ceratae, were conveyed to a beloved through trusted intermediaries. Ovid's Heroides, a collection of imagined letters from mythological heroines or heroines to their lovers, embeds this practice within an epic literary form, leaving a deep imprint on Rome both as literature and as emotional tradition. Bathing culture also carried a different dimension of love within it. The great public baths, the thermae, were open to both women and men during the day, though in separate areas or at separate hours. But certain smaller and more private baths are known to have permitted mixed use, serving as settings where acquaintances were made and where the fuse was lit for encounters that would extend into the night. Chapter today: the night watchman and the servants of fire. The vigils, right watchmen, carried out a task that was both utterly bots and extraordinarily arduous. The great majority of these men were freedmen, former slaves who had been manumitted, and as a result, they occupied quite a low position in Rome's social hierarchy. Despite this, the duty they performed was of critical importance to the city's survival. The primary responsibility of the vigiles was firefighting. Their essential equipment consisted of a pumping device called a siphona, chains of bucket carriers, and large grappling hooks known as sepae, but firefighting technology severely limited. More often than not, the strategy for halting the spread of flames involved in demolish structure directly in the path of the fire. This controlled demolition sometimes worked, and sometimes, when miscalculated, turned into a disaster of its own. The vigiles also performed the duty of nighttime patrol. They and question suspicious individuals and suppress public disturbances. Their authority, however, was limited. They were unable to intervene in serious crimes, and their role was confined to maintaining the most basic elements of public safety. Real military power was concentrated in the Praetorian Guard, quartered outside the city, and in Rome's 3 urban cohorts. For the vigiles themselves, the night was exhausting and dangerous. Standing watch for months, without interruption, trudging through the cold of winter nights, running toward fires, and occasionally confronting criminals. These conditions created an unhealthy environment by any measure. Despite all this, the vigiles arguably not received the historical attention they deserve. Sources typically mention them only in passing. The existence of the vigiles also served as a tool of social control, breaking up suspicious nocturnal gatherings, surveilling illegal activities, and identifying potential elements. Unrest all fell within their remit. In this respect, the vigiles constituted a fascinating institution simultaneously performed the functions of public safety and political oversight. Chapter 5. The Night of the Daddy. Cemeteries and ensign the culture enter Dutch inruv Dutch in Rome. The dead could not be buried within the city. By law, all tombs were situated outside the city walls. For this reason, great Roman roads were lined on both sides with extensive burial grounds. Along famous routes, such as the Via Appia and the Via Flaminia, stood a breathtaking variety of funerary monuments. Grand mausoleums for great families, more modest memorials for the middle class, simple standing stones for the poor, or nameless mounds of earth. Night transformed these cemetery spaces into profoundly unsettling places. The Roman people maintained a deep ambivalence toward these sites, burdened simultaneously by the obligation honor their ancestors, and by a genuine fear of the dead. Spirits known as lemirs were believed to be the restless ghosts of individuals who had died, had properly buried, or had been buried. These spirits wandered the night and could bring harm to the living. The festival of Limeralia, held each year in May, was designed to appease these restless spirits. At midnight, the male head of the household would rise from bed, walk barefoot through the house with hands held behind his back as if bound, scatter the beans one by one upon the ground, and whisper, "With these beans I redeem myself and my family." He would then drive the spirits of the dead from the house by making a loud clattering noise and calling out, "Begone, ancestral shades, the shades." This ritual is described in detail by Ovid in his Fasti. Parentalia was a more formal and more public festival of commemoration for the dead. Celebrated each year in February over family, Fentine days, families, cemeteries decorated the tombs of their ancestors and left offic ungs of food. During these days, all temples in the closed. Marriages could not be performed, and public ceremonies were postponed, for the entire city was in mourning. The fear of death was intertwined with the fear of night. Approaching a cemetery after dark was understood to carry the risk of disturbing the dead. The belief that sorcerers and necromancers visited cemeteries by night was widespread. These practitioners were said to use sacrificial blood, special plants, and magical formulae to summon the spirits of the departed. In Lucan's epic Pharsalia, there is an extraordinarily compelling and deeply sinister account of a sorceress named Erichtho performing nocturnal ritual over a corpse in a graveyard. The Columbadia niche tombs were collective burial structures built primarily for Rome's middle class and for slaves. Within these structures, the ashes of hundreds or even thousands of individuals were preserved in urns held in small niches. By night, these spaces took on an atmosphere of utter silence and mystery. Irrelative on commemorative days, at moments of personal significance, would give a visit these niches by candlelight, pouring libations and leaving food in honor of those they had lost. Chapter Caesar, Nights of Poetry and Philosophy, Phalersi. The dark hours the mine hunt night held a special meaning for Rome's intellectual class as well. Many of Roth's great thinkers and writers regard the nighttime hours as their most productive period of work. Pliny the Elder, writing his natural history, frequently made use of the hours after dark. His nephew, the Younger, recounts how he Venkel, even while observing the eruption of Vesuvius, with a defiance that bordered on the suicidal, continued to dictate throughout. For Stoic philosophers, the night carried a particular quality of value. The Meditations Aurelius were in all likelihood composed during the nighttime hours, in a campaign tent, or in some quiet room of the palace. This work opens an extraordinary window into the inner life of Rome's most oswaldful man. In the darkness of night, Aurelius examines his own weaknesses and fears, and interrogates the transience of human existence. Tomorrow you may die, therefore live rightly today. A sentence is sense that's itself a reflection of the existential questioning that the nighttime hours pressed upon the mind. Seneca, too, to me made productive use of the nighttime. In his letters, he speaks of how darkness of night strips away the absurd pretensions of social performance and creates an ideal environment for genuine thought. Something in the logic of nothing is more honest than the night led him to believe that darkness revealed the unmasked human being. Seneca's approach reflects a search for inner honesty that the modern reader would immediately recognize. Readings and the educative dimension of the night were also significant for the children of elite families. Pliny the Younger's letters, in which he mentions having poetry read aloud to various guests or reading it himself, demonstrate just how widespread this cultural practice was. Libraries, an indispensable feature of prosperous households. Reading by lamplight at night was, for the educated Roman, a mark of virtue. Interest in astrology and astronomy also intensified during the nighttime hours. The reading of the stars to divine the future was a practice taken with seriousness in Rome or soon Rome. Even emperors consulted advisors known as mathematici or astrologi. At times, these individuals acquired enormous influence. At other times, they were too exile for delivering prophecies that seemed to threaten the throne. Star charts and nocturnal observations of the sky wedded the point as an intersected with religion and the belief in fate. Chapter A Surveys, the endless Rome's legacy and the closing curtain What we know about Rome's knights is largely assembled from the interpretation of scattered and indirect sources. The satirist's barb, the philosopher's letter, the oblique reference buried in a legal text, the charred bone or lead tablet brought to light by an archaeological excavation. When all of these fragments are gathered together, the mosaic of millions of who live in the darkness begins slowly to take shape. The Roman knight is, in truth, not so foreign to us. Those who could not sleep because of the noise, those compelled, worked deep into the night, those with secret rendezvous to keep, those seeking the thrill of the forbidden, those afraid of the dark, those who looked up at the stars in search of meaning. All of them, thousands of years ago, were living, breathing, loving, and losing, just as we do today. Perhaps the most striking lesson of this history, simply, humanity does not change. What changes? Only the costume, the setting, the technological tools, but the smell of wine in a Roman tavern, the feeling of freedom a gladiator experienced when finally released in the night, the excitement of waiting beneath a lover's window, the cry of a mother trying to save her child from the flames. These timeless fragments of the universal human experience. As the Roman Empire descended into decline, the night was transformed along with it. New cultures branded as barbaric, the rising voice of Christianity, the contraction of trade and population. All of these reshaped the meaning and the content of darkness. But those people lived. They pressed their traces into buildings, carved their names into stone, cast their curses in lead, and wrote their loves into poetry. And today, we gaze upon the faint echo of that flickering flame in the dark. When we plunge into the forbidden night of Rome, discovering our own shadowed corners, our own foreign desires, our humanity. For history is not the archive of a finished past. History is the most indirect and most profound way we have of understanding ourselves. The sun is rising once again. Rome streets are lit anew. The columns are bathed in golden light, and the forers back to life. The night has ended. But what was lived in that night, the wine and blood and tears that were spilled in that darkness, continues to reach across the centuries and touch us still. This precisely why we told this story. And this precisely why you listened.